Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Architecture. It's my great pleasure and treat to introduce Erin and Mr. Rudin to share their work with us today. 2 years ago, my mentor and great friend, Dr. Sharon Sutton, called me to ask me if I had read or gotten this book, Out of Architecture. I had it, but I had not yet read it. She said, your colleague Erin is going to get herself into trouble. By trouble, I'm sure she meant the good trouble that Congressman John Lewis spoke of, the trouble that sparks revolution, and the trouble that leads to change in architecture and society broadly and in general. As I read her book, I began to think of when I started my own career in architecture over 25 years ago. This was before social media, this was before the internet, this was before email was even really a thing. And so all we had was each other. We would call each other to find out, hey, what do you make? Hey, what's it like working in your office? It was only the one-on-one interpersonal connections that you were lucky enough to have in a city that allowed us to get ideas around what equity could be and what it was to be treated fairly in an office. The idea of justice, the idea of equity, these things did not exist as the kind of degrees of conversation and things that we expect from practice as it does today. So Erin's work, along with her partner, Jack Rudin's work, is really essential to where we are today in architecture. So I'm really happy that they're joining us today. Let me introduce them. So Erin Pellegrino is a strategist, designer, and registered architect who believes design is a powerful catalyst for change, a process of engaging with problems, opportunities, hopes, and world-shaping ideas. Through Matter, her design and fabrication studio, she transforms visionary concepts into extraordinary spaces, objects, and experiences that push standards and boundaries. She is the co-founder of Out of Architecture, a career resource, community, and talent services agency, and co-author of Out of Architecture, The Value of Architects Beyond Traditional Practice. Her commitment to expanding design's impact extends to academia, where she has taught at Harvard, Cornell, the New School, CUNY, and the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Erin holds a B.Arch from Cornell University and an MBA from Quinnipiac School of Business and Technology. Jake Rudin is a strategist, design, and innovation leader with over 15 years of experience in building things from the ground up. Working across a wide variety of company scales, countries, and areas of product development, digitization, and prototyping, he has delivered manufacturing innovations, commercialized software, grown and scaled multi-city teams, and had a blast doing it all. Most recently at Adidas, he was responsible for global teams in computational design, digital technologies, and pattern engineering, developing and implementing cutting-edge solutions for digital product creation, design automation, and data-driven footwear design. Rudin is also the co-founder and managing partner of Out of Architecture. Rudin has a diverse background in architecture design, education, and business, with design degrees from both Harvard and Cornell, as well as an MBA. It's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Jake and Erin. Thank you.
I do not envy the task that Peter has reading our extremely detailed bios, but you did an excellent job. Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, that was actually really moving. Thank you. I didn't actually know that's how you came to the book, so I appreciate you sharing that with us. Also, Sharon is such a badass. I'm surprised she read our book. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction, and also for the sort of tenacity of putting this event together. I know it's been a couple years in the making, and the last time I spoke to Peter about putting this together, because we had talked about it every time I saw him, he was like, you know, I really wanna get an event going for you, but you are just a fucking controversy. Which is great. That's what I aspired to be. So I appreciate that quite a bit. Right, we do need that. But more so, I'm more happy that there's so many faces here today for this talk. I recognize that it's a difficult time to be a young person in architecture. It's a difficult time to be looking for a job, period. And it's also Friday night. on a very nice New York City day. So I appreciate that you all came here to have a conversation with us. You'll learn quite quickly that our personalities are here to be helpful and hopefully funny, and hopefully we'll have a meaningful, useful, and productive discussion. We're going to show some slides. Jake is going to introduce our talk here. We're going to show some slides and then hopefully dedicate a significant amount of time to Q&A or AMA, where we really hope to engage with you all in this. So thank you all for being here, and my co-founder and best friend, Jake Rudin.
If you do decide to start a super controversial business with a title that screams getting in trouble, do it for sure with your best friend. It is a blast. And Aaron and I have had a privilege of doing this together for, as a business, 8 years, but as friends for about 15. And we're here to talk to you today about all of the incredible and meaningful talents that architects have. So please, by no means, take us for evangelists of, evacuating from the profession. There is no fire. We are not trying to, cause you to run and scream and hide. But there are absolutely some things that we want to recognize. And one of those is that, that the education that we afford ourselves, both in academia and in early career, doesn't necessarily prepare you for practice. And I think that's something that, is coming to the forefront, is becoming less and less controversial to address. But it's an important subject here because it begs the question, then what are we trained for? And so that's what we're here to address today. And we want to talk a little bit about how we found ourselves in that position, the ways in which we're trying to open doors for people just like you, and hopefully to incite, some revolutionary questions and some laughs and things like that. So first of all, thank you all for turning out. This is an incredible showing for a Friday night. I was telling Aaron, if this was my Friday night, I may not be in your seat, but then again, we all have imposter syndrome, so probably wouldn't want to hear myself speak for an hour. On that note,
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Out of Architecture is, and then we'll tell you kind of where it came from. But Out of Architecture is a career resource community. Didn't start that way. Jake will get into that later. But essentially, we found ourselves having a lot of discussions, the two of us, about our careers, and then folks would come to us to talk to us about the things that we were doing. And we've essentially started a career resource thing that became an advising network. It has become now a very large community, which we're humbled and excited for, and now has just started over the last 18 months or so in talent services, which means we are working with companies who are looking to recruit architects for roles in, out, and adjacent to architecture. The title Out of Architecture comes from, Jake called me one day and he's just like, all these conversations we're having, we've got to make a thing out of this, and I've got the best name for it. We're gonna call it Out of Architecture. And then like 2 days later, we had a logo and a website, and it spun up from there.
and that's the power of being a designer, is you can
Right.
do that in 48 hours with no sleep and a ridiculous amount of caffeine.
All the skills that you get in school. So it's grown into this amazing thing, and I think this next phase of our company, being this kind of talent recruiting agency, has allowed us to really have a lot of the conversations and a lot of the things that we're going to talk to you about today at a scale that has been both really productive and really enlightening. And I think, whether we're a controversy or not, the idea of expanding what it means to practice and expanding what it means to be an architect is really personal to me. I am an architect, although I'm in this state not allowed to call myself one, because I'm licensed in Massachusetts and New Jersey, so call the police. But to me, this is a big question of, like, what does it mean to be an architect? And for me, it means building really cool shit, because that's what I get the opportunity to do. But it also means helping others understand how their passions and their skills can turn into them getting to build cool shit at a variety of different scales.
So I mentioned, start a company with your best friend. Aaron and I kind of grew up together in this ethos of design being one of the most powerful things that you can do with your life. And we both did our undergraduate educations at a very fine capital A architecture institution. And the education was unparalleled. I have not practiced architecture for the better part of a decade, although I feel like I get to participate. But we began with these sort of really joyous, really vibrant ideals of what architecture could do out in the world and what architects could do out in the world. And I think, out of architecture, obviously the very first idea that comes to mind is leaving architecture, but we really want to focus in this talk on what you bring with you, what you get out of architecture, what you take from that education and practice, because these are really incredible skills that people value. As part of that lengthy introduction that Peter was able to give, there is a small line in there that says, I've been in footwear for a decade, and I can't tell you the number of people over the years who have asked, like, what is an architect doing in footwear, and I think it's a very interesting opportunity to then educate people on what architects are capable of and what we do, and the fact that, being in a model shop, being in a studio setting, being in a creative network, and having to translate between all of these things is such an exceptionally complex set of skills and talents. There is, however, this kind of moment that at least both of us experienced, leaving the shelter of academia, and we prolonged it for quite a while.
We were both afraid.
Three degrees each, trying to stave off the inevitable reality of life. But this moment doesn't necessarily last, forever. I think that's a big part of the talk.
And I think, to piggyback off of that too, I remember when Jake first took his role at Adidas, I had started teaching at our alma mater. And a couple of the professors were like, what is he doing at Adidas? Like, why isn't he working for Meyer? That hadn't happened yet. And all this sort of stuff. And only one professor was like, yeah, that makes sense. Shoes are houses for feet. And that person was our first year professor and was our foray into how you can think about the world, and I think is the best part of how architects think about the world. One, it's like we can post-rationalize and spin kind of anything, and we're great storytellers. But two, just like flipping something on its head and getting you to see the world another way. So again, you start a company with your best friend that you don't imagine to ever be a company, and surprise, here we are. But we both have alternate careers here, or we've always said that out of architecture is our side thing, which is really great because it's definitely become a main thing for both of us, which has been fun to balance. But while it started with just us, it is no longer just us. And at our largest in terms of our operating team, both on the advising side and the media side, we've been at critical mass about 15. We've been looking at ways that we could bring more conversations and more dialogue and more perspectives into this, because we quickly learned that while we've sort of tag-teamed what it means to design our careers, it's a lot better when you put more people into that process. I mean, design is an iterative process. Your career is a design problem. We're going to keep saying that over and over and over again. And that's more easily done with others. That is our studio method. There's a reason that when you're struggling, even if you're not looking forward to that review, putting it up on the wall and just having a conversation, good, bad, or indifferent, propels you forward. And what we've been able to do is work with a series of coaches, mentors, media partners. There are a lot of resources that we put out there that we want you to be aware of that help bring some of these stories to light. So Out of Architecture is not just us. We have a huge team behind us that helps us do this. A couple of them are here tonight, and we appreciate you being here. But that's also in the vein of getting resources out there to folks like you. So we have Tangents, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which are case studies out of architecture. We have Red Lines, which I don't suggest you listen to after a really bad review or a bad meeting with your boss. But if you do have stories that you'd like to tell anonymously, the things that have happened in the profession, our job, we feel, as stewards of a lot of these stories, even though we work under NDA, is to put it out there to let folks know that you are not alone. So we're going to have a talk today about some of the things in the profession that I think have brought us to this point, but also what can you do with that skill, those skills and those expertise that allow you to sort of design your own career.
So, again, this is the cool thing about being an architect or being architecturally trained is, you can do really fun stuff like break your logo down into a bunch of cool slides that you're going to talk about. So let me see if I can.
You have a logo that is got a concept and a story behind it, because we're just that crazy.
No lie, though, this is totally post-rationalized, so
100%.
Wish us luck. So, the out of architecture kind of thinking comes from this idea that architecture is what we all think we're going to do. And I'm generalizing, so for those of you in the audience who do not come from an architecture degree or are at a different phase, bear with me. But for the majority of you who are in this phase of either still remembering or being actively involved in your architectural education in those early years, it's very hard to get outside of that narrow path, progressing towards eventually being a principal, hanging out your own shingle, looking towards licensure, and thinking of yourself as an architect. And that noun we talk about in the book is often at the center of a crisis, a kind of identity crisis that we as architects suffer from, which is it's very hard to let go of that. And that might be the thing that you thought you would do forever. And we have had clients who we've advised who have done architecture for 30, 35 years and still are craving, what else could I do with this? I think there's an inkling in everybody's mind that maybe you explored through your thesis. Maybe there was something that you were very passionate about. I mean, we've had studios on all kinds of things. My thesis was a treehouse. And until I saw Treehouse Masters, I didn't know that there was actually a job where you could do that. It's probably not a lot of, call for that in the city, but that's not the point. The point is, there are these hints at things outside of traditional practice, right? And it becomes very, very difficult to justify the pain and suffering, the hours, the intensity of practice when you can see that there is something else out there. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that other thing is better, but it does put a kind of a bug in your ear, does just put this little seed of doubt that this singular pathway is the right pathway for you. And it's a very challenging thing, especially when your whole world is spending time with other architects, spending time thinking about architecture, experiencing it, creating it, to understand that this barrier, this border between architecture and other, it's made up. It's totally imaginary. And if you follow kind of the architectural, path back to this idea of the master architect, that person, the Michelangelos, were involved in so many other things, right? They called themselves artists. They were painters. They were designers, inventors, all of these other things, right? They did houses for feet. They did all of the sort of miscellaneous, and they didn't have to execute it from end to end. They didn't have to be the expert. The portrait of a singular unified artist is a total myth, and we, I think, as a generation, as a kind of era in time, like we're breaking down some of that myth that it's just one person. But still, there was this picture that at some point architects could do everything. We've outsourced a lot of that work to other contractors and so on, but there is absolutely a spot for you in this world that is between those two things. It does not necessarily mean leaving architecture or abandoning it entirely. It might mean you have a different title, and we're going to go through hundreds of those titles. At least we'll show them on the screen later. But this is a very important realization, and it is the core of when most people come to us as potential clients for coaching, candidates for jobs, things like that. And I really want to leave you with this for a moment, because it is a difficult thing to imagine yourself not being wholly committed. And we have clients that come to us who still are certain they want to leave, but I can't do it until I pass those last two exams. And I think this mentality of, why are you gunning for that title? Why do you have to hold on to that? Why spend $1,500 a year to maintain a license you're not going to use? Sorry, AIA, thank you for hosting. But at the same time, I think these are really, really important questions to ask yourself. What does it mean to be an architect?
And they're deeply personal. And I think, I don't think you get into architecture unless you really love some aspect about it. I had the privilege of working for Todd and Billy, and their mission statement starts with a sentence that says, to build is an optimistic act. So I think anyone who becomes an architect at some level, and it's trite and platitudinous, but we all want to change the world in some small way, right? If you're going to put something on the world, it better make it better, because otherwise, like, nature's pretty nice, right? So I think there's a lot of passion and derivation in why people go to architecture school, but more so why they stay there. And that's not discounting the folks who also stay there, because I'm sure there are parent pressures. This is a profession also that's rooted in the gentrified class, and that's no longer the case, right? It's incredibly expensive to go to college, and if you're going to stick with it, you're going to get a professional degree, and hopefully you're going to change the makeup of what we are now, right? So it meant a lot to me to get that title. One, because there's I'm sure some narcissism there. Two, I'm competitively driven, right? So this idea that there's a flag that I can go get, and I don't discount that in anyone who comes to us and says, I want to finish those exams. But I think questioning, what sort of ownership can you take over that title, and how can you make this yours? Because when you get into practice, and for those of you in the room who are not currently still in school or a couple of years out of school, you can recognize some of the things that we're talking about from the fee side of things, right? So when we talk about, we've outsourced some of these things to subcontractors, there's also whole fields, that's sparkling. I'll finish it. Yeah, sorry. I'm bougie about water. Yes, we've outsourced some things, but we've also become very risk averse, thank you, not aggressive. And there are plenty of fields that are coming in and frankly eating our lunch, right? So there is a crisis, I think, not just in perhaps trying to think about how you can think about your career and how it was fed by your passions, but also we're at a crisis of what is our relevance, what is our agency? And if we don't expand this definition of practice, we run the risk of becoming more or less irrelevant. And I think when we go into really beautiful spaces, we go into beautiful places, or we put really nice shoes on our feet, we understand why design exists. And we understand it even more so when we walk into spaces that were not considered or not thought about, right? So I fully believe in the power of the architect, and frankly, to some extent, the power of traditional practice. But it's becoming more and more untenable for lots of folks. And we call this moment, particularly in the book, or at least what our realization was, the disconnect. And why does this exist? Why is it that all of these passions and this energy that is stoked in school that allows you to stay up for hours on end, whether or not that's healthy, we can talk about later. But there are those nights where you can't put it down. And I still have those nights, right? Where I'm in bed and I'm like, no, I want to work out that detail. That drive, that passion is because there is something in you that wants to contribute to the world and make it a better place, right? And then you get into the field and the overlap of what you were taught in school and what perhaps drove you to have that passion, that tenacity, that kind of autodidactic nature of wanting to explore these problems, that's the cost of entry. Everyone expects that from you. Everyone had to survive it. It's a type of boot camp. We joke that it's a cult. It kind of is, or a religion. We bow at the kind of altar of architecture. And I think there's some healthy things there too, but the profession is a whole other form of education. And it's that way by design. Other countries do this differently, but here in the States, we have school, the academy, the discipline. You're trained to spend either 5 to 7, sometimes 8 years learning architecture and design as a first language. I have a mentor that used to say, you don't go to school to learn what you're going to do in your job. You go to school to show that you can learn how to learn. And architects do that, I think, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, in spades, right? When we went to architecture school, we were just joking about this earlier. Our CAD teacher taught CAD in such a way that it was red lines on a black screen. And my lovely co-founder here is colorblind and could not see a thing she did the entire semester. Right, and I gave up because it also wasn't incredibly useful.
I did get an A. I just want to be clear.
We went to Panera instead and watched YouTube videos about how to learn CAD, which meant when I got into an office, I sucked at CAD because I was self-taught from YouTube, and YouTube was bad then. But anyway, all of this to say that there's this moment that happens, or maybe perhaps a series of moments, where you come out of school with all of this passion, a lot of skills, frankly, a lot of desire and tenacity and an ability and energy to make a difference, but no one knows how to use it. appropriately because you don't know how to design a building yet. You weren't taught how to design a building. And even if you were, it was a facsimile of a building. And now you need to learn how to do that with others because architecture is a team sport. Sorry for all my NJIT students in the room who've heard me say that over and over again. But even if you've learned to design one solo, you haven't learned to coordinate that with your structural engineers, your plumbers. You haven't learned what to do when everything is on site needing to be solved. And that makes you feel sometimes useless.
And I would argue a little bit that, this isn't the fault of the new employee. This is, in part, a problem of the reception of the industry. And that, sometimes, quite often, firms don't know what to do with the skills that we've learned. And I found that to be the case. I, spent a lot of time interviewing after my undergraduate degree. Spent a lot of time interviewing with architecture firms after my master's degree. And I specialized in design technologies. So I thought, what a great thing to have. I have this exceptional set of skills in coding and digital fabrication and data visualization, and I know Unity, and I can do game design, and all of these things that firms are going to crave. They're going to want me to bring those skills in and to teach everyone the new ways of the world. I could not land a job to save my life. And the one that I applied for that was a design technologist with every single one of those keywords turned out to be a BIM manager role. So that appetite on the firm side, again, this is in large part due to the business model, right? That those are not billable hours. Nobody wants to pay you to make a Unity model for them to walk through as a little avatar so that they can experience their building. They want it cheaply. I think that's fair to say. But there are so many other industries and so many other places where those skills are extremely valuable and where the appetite for research and development is built into the business model. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be those, wildly specialized skills, right? It can be something as simple as retail design, which is architecture through and through. Little bit interiors, but we can do that, so we're not going to give them that credit. And retail design is this amazing opportunity to do projects at pace, to do them rapidly, to do them under the guise of a brand where you learn and you embody what it means to be a part of a sort of, a brand. I'm just going to have to say it again. And I think, that becomes this very interesting question of, did you learn how to go out and join a traditional practice in a firm? Or did you learn how to go do everything else? That's the title of the talk, in case you didn't pick up on that.
And I think it's important, mainly because I'm kind of obsessed with words, but it's important to break down what it means to be a professional, right? We did 5-year Bachelor's of Architecture degrees, which means we came out and had the clearance to get licensed. You can look at sister professions, so accountants, doctors, lawyers. There is a standard that you're held to as a professional. But if you break down this word, the first 3 definitions, and again, pro-prac kids, sorry, the first 3 definitions are essentially, a vowing to a religious act, a provocation, a dedication, and again, a lot of this sort of cult-like language, which has roots and benefits in things like camaraderie, in things like feeling like you're committed to something larger than yourself, but it also really lays the groundwork for things like abuse or unhealthy relationships with things like titles, work, and each other. We are not the only profession that is dealing with this. Obviously, these are kind of systemic issues in society, but for a very long time, they were the cost of entry again in architecture. And I think at this point, that is just no longer acceptable. I think schools have understood that that is no longer acceptable. And frankly, we now have the mechanisms by which firms are being called out for some of these practices. But part of this is also us as individuals understanding that something needs to change. And it's not the dedication to this being a calling. I'm comfortable with that language, but at what cost? Because it's not like it's making us as a profession more relevant, having more ability to enact change, it's actually, I think, causing a whole lot of focus on the wrong things. And that does not help us moving
And it's
forward.
absolutely, these practices are pushing talent out of the profession. It's easier and easier. I mean, Peter said in his introduction, the internet wasn't a thing for a long time. And I think that might be a bit of an exaggeration. You're not that old, Peter. But it is absolutely getting easier and easier to see and to have transparency to a lot of things, including what could I be making elsewhere? What is my time worth? What am I expending my energy on? And money is not the only measure of value by any means, but it is certainly one of the ways by which we are acknowledged for all the time and effort and energy that we put in and that we have put in over the years to learn these crafts and skills. And I do think, we're fighting a little bit against this wheel of, having a very explicit scope of expertise, but at the cost of, being blinded to a lot of what else is out there.
And sometimes it's just trying to understand all of the skills and expertise that you put into your studio project, and we're going to talk about this a bit later. It's just reframing how you can then look at where else you can apply those things, where it's going to be valued. And Jake mentions, yes, money is one metric, but at the end of the day, we're building buildings and cities we can't afford to live in. And that is, in and of itself, not sustainable. From that perspective. And also I think, there's this culture of, Peter talked about, going up to someone and saying like, all right, well, what are you making and how are you making it work? And is it a great place to work? I would hope that because you're in this room and hopefully you came with somebody, you have folks in a community that you can talk to about how you're being treated, what you're making, what you should be making. And I'm hoping that that bottom-up approach starts to change things that are just systematically wrong, I feel, in the profession. And again, thanks AIA for hosting the event, but you've made it against our code of ethics that we cannot talk about what we charge, and that is more strict than federal law around what it is that we do. And this only comes by building a community, having a friend, particularly a friend that doesn't look like you and doesn't come from the same places that you come from, that you can bounce ideas off of. That is a huge, huge draw. And if you don't have those people, or you came alone, or you're afraid to have those conversations with your colleagues, we get that. We're here for you. That is where the out of architecture kind of ethos was born from. That is kind of born out of our camaraderie as friends and colleagues. And it's something that we feel is the only way that we're going to kind of push everyone, or kind of bring everyone up in the profession, and hopefully expand the boundaries through that practice.
So we mentioned that there's a bunch of places you can go. And I mean, this term is central to this talk, but also to architecture, of course, and the paths that we choose. But I know that all of you have seen these other adjacencies, right? Not just terms like, oh, well, there's a client, of course, and there's client-side owner's rep and things like that, but fashion and graphics and development and the technology side of things and all these different pathways. And we now have had 10,000 clients. We have a community of about 70,000 people who have gone through an infinite variation of these pathways. Some have even come back into architecture with those experiences and had a lot to provide to the industry. But we break that down not just into, great, there's these titles, but also how do you map those skills? Early in the social media work that we were doing, we had a series called, if you liked X in studio, then maybe you would like Y. And I think that kind of correlation is very difficult and is something that we have evolved kind of well beyond just this diagram. But you'll start to see, and this is very illegible for those of you at the back, so I will read some of them aloud. But
poor line
we
weights,
have
sorry.
things like, for those of you that are interested in this kind of world of 3D modeling, right? There is automotive, there is product design, there is footwear design. We also have communication skills. Our amazing social media manager comes from an interiors background, right? And that is not a coincidence. That is an education path that teaches you all of these amazing solutions. We have clients who have gone on to lead some incredible brands, marketing, and social media. We also have clients who are very interested in materials and finishes and have leaned into environmental and experiential design and museum curation and all of these things. So, I think the bounds are effectively limitless. What is so difficult is to imagine yourself in that position. And I get it. I flew here from interviews. I also have a career. I have a job. I actually don't have a job right now. That was the whole point of interviewing. But I digress. It is not something that you can necessarily solve for yourself. I have the same imposter syndrome that you have, thinking, what am I doing in this world that I was not trained for, that I know nothing about? And I think not only do the conversations around transparency allow you to function successfully within architecture, but they give you these lenses into other things. And that is equally as important to dive into with your friend, confidant, stranger in this room who is here because they were interested in the same topic. Speaking of our incredible social media person, hi, Jasmine. Sorry, she's a little shy. But I think there is an opportunity here to expand this map. And actually that is a project that we have on our plate, but it continues to be an ever evolving grid. And I think it always has at the center the same core skills, the same amazing education that we often take for granted as being only suited to one path.
And it's important to remember, again, your career is a design problem. You are trained to make something out of nothing. You are trained to bring in parameters, put those into a hierarchy, balance conflicting interests. You are trained to do this. It's very hard to do for yourself. This is the reason why humans go into therapy. And one of the reasons that I think people work with us here in career coaching, but the reality is you are trained to make something out of nothing. And your career does not start from nothing, right? Your career does not start from, well, I just graduated from architecture school and I have this degree and there's this pressure to go be an architect. I don't even know what that means. And every architect is different, but kind of the same. And the reality is you have the opportunity to own your career, own what it is you want to do, if you can start to think about it less as I have to follow a prescribed path and more as I have to figure out what allows me to align the skills, the passion, and the agency that I have in the world, and find a way for that to have an input and an output. Output is what you can give, and input is what keeps you going, right? Everyone needs to eat, have a place to sleep, and hopefully foster the relationships that you want to foster. And frankly, again, we come from a profession that was born out of a gentrified class. And if you come from an immense amount of wealth, that does not mean that wealth should subsidize your value as an architect to do the work that you do. So long our profession has done that, and it has not done us any favors because we don't know how to talk about money. We don't know how to advocate for the salaries that we want en masse. We know that because the numbers are kept down, right? And we don't know how to advocate for our value in society. And that starts with you understanding the value and the skills that you've honed in school and then in practice as well, that can come back to how can you turn that into outputs that get engaged in the world.
So these are just a few of the places that people have ended up over the years. We actually have been doing a bit of a data project, and I think the last count of companies that out of architecture clients have landed in was somewhere around 3,300 different organizations and companies. We've had people start puzzle companies. We've had people go design yachts, which were not for us, but if this talk goes viral, we'll have half a yacht. But I think they're representative of a lot of the pathways we've spoken about. Some more than others, and of course these are attempts at having recognizable names on the screen. But I think you get the point that this is a very broad selection of organizations, many of whom we would not associate with architects and architectural designers. But this is an even broader list. This is a very, very long list that I will come back to of titles that our clients have taken on and jobs that people have applied for. Now, we've done parts of this lecture numerous times, and we decided it would be prudent to highlight a few for you because it is quite an overwhelming list. But I want to take a second and describe a few of these things and try to bridge that gap for you mentally, to cross that imaginary border. 3D technical artist, digital studio. 3D technical artist, someone who loves topology, who understands NURBS, who is embedded in meshes, who is obsessed with ZBrush, who loves UVs and material maps. Those are people that you know. They may not be in your firm, but they might have been in your class. They may no longer even be in architecture. They may be doing other things. But the person who was the first to discover Gravity Sketch in your studio and to be up on the roof and like doing all that crazy stuff with goggles on, that's that person. Computational design specialist, that was me. That is actually someone who is a terrible designer, who is afraid of a white piece of paper, but loves math and got through architecture school like that, with a lot of humor and the understanding that I would never work at Herzog and de Meuron, and that was okay.
And I would help you with your colors.
Yes, exactly. We have consultants, we have people who go into human-centered design, who go into UX, who are in governance and sustainability. I have a friend in Portland where I live who was an architect and now helps to design all of the sourcing processes for all of the different materials that come through the massive semiconductor producers that exist in Portland. That's nothing to do with architecture, right? Wrong. It's site, it's project management, it's an understanding of what materials have what levels of embodied carbon, it's navigating absurd codes and criteria, things that we do in practice. I didn't, but you might have. And these other titles, these are things that might be more approachable, things like an exhibition designer for museum exhibits, right? We know museums. We design the big part of the museum. Why not design the small part of the museum? We have experiential designers. These are people who sometimes design temporary things. Sometimes are designing permanent experiences. Those of you who are familiar with places like Meow Wolf, those are dream jobs for architects. It's unfiltered, unfettered architectural bliss. We have integrated marketing manager, possibly the most boring title you will ever hear, but you could do it. And all it means is having a really good understanding of the context of brand guidelines, of who is the target audience, right? And these are things that you do. You understand who's going to be using your building. You understand what they want to see or what you want them to see and how to curate those sometimes just paths of circumnavigation, right? It's the same in the digital world, and we all know how to wireframe and use InDesign and use Illustrator. And if you lie through your teeth, you could have this job.
This is the person in the group project who forces you to sit down 3 hours before and do a run through and be like, no, we have to move this to the front. What you just said didn't make sense. And where's that graphic that's going to explain everything before we show the site plan? That's that person.
100%. And on this final page, there are a few that I think are quite appetizing. And one of those is, as I mentioned, retail design. Spoke about that a little bit, but Kiehl's was up here. We have a client who several years ago left traditional architecture to go work in retail design and now is the director of the Kiehl's store design program here in New York. I don't need skincare. I have this is natural. But if I did, I would love to work at a place like Kiehl's. And I think, it's important to remember also that these jobs exist in all different kinds of industries. And I think it's difficult for people. They'll say, well, what industry should I go into? I don't know anything about automotive. So many of our community worked at places like Rivian and Canoe and we probably can't say Tesla now, and other companies not run by megalomaniacs. But those places, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in that final product. And I think that, that translation is very difficult because as architects, we see ourselves as stewards through the entire process. You're on a project for 5 years, for 7 years. We have the Portland airport is it's actually quite well-known, beautiful design by a firm ZGF, which I think also has quite a large office here. And they did a fabulous job. They've been doing that job. I think they did the original airport design 40 years ago. That project has taken a decade. And I personally cannot imagine spending a decade of my career on a single project. That's not to say it's not worth doing, but there are so many other ways to operate, and you can be a piece of a puzzle and really enjoy that piece and also have visibility to a pretty broad spectrum of other disciplines. I think that's a really enticing thing.
And I think it's worth mentioning, and this is, I think I teach at like 4 different academies at this point, but we went to 2 elite architecture schools together, and no one was talking about this. We were not the first company or people to decide I want to do something else with my architecture degree, but it was just never celebrated, or it was never like shown as an option. And I realize that also as designers, it's our job to research and figure these things out. But I think that lack of celebration, particularly when we were kind of coming of age and coming out of school, it was hushed tones. And, oh yeah, I'm thinking of applying to Tesla. Back then it was cool. And it was like, I can't let, my professor hear that, because they're gonna be like, why aren't you working for Meyer, right? That was the sort of feedback that we got, which is not necessarily the case in most academies today, but there's still a lack of, I think, support around career services. A lot of career services at universities are not tailored to design roles. They're gonna be great in getting your friends, that internship at Goldman. Stay in touch with those friends. Architects don't hire other architects. But I think the reality is, it's like, why do we not have more of a mechanism to share these things? And again, thank you AIA for doing this, because this gives us the opportunity to put that out there. But we used to have people coming, they would follow us from their Finsta. They would reach out to us and say, I'm taking this call from my closet because I don't want my roommate to know that I'm considering leaving architecture. And that is fucked. Why don't we celebrate all of the amazing things that architects are doing in society, such that maybe people will know what it is an architect can do? Because I still get asked, oh, you're an architect, so like blueprints. I'm 34 years old. I've never seen a set of blueprints. I saw Renzo Piano make a model, or I saw a model that Renzo Piano's workshop made with blueprints integrated into them, but I have never actually seen a set of blueprints, right? The world does not really know or understand what we do, and that's a problem, because when you go to hire a doctor, you don't think about it as hiring a doctor, you think about it, you're bleeding and you need help, or you're in trouble with the law and you know you need a lawyer. The world doesn't know that they need us because they don't know what it is that we're doing, and we're not just doing buildings. So I think we should celebrate that more, and you can own that title of architect, even if it means senior computational designer or senior designer of ads, campaigns, and footage. Why not?
Hold for applause.
No. Don't do
Sorry, we don't have one of those signs like the Saturday Night Live sign. So look, we don't have to read through all of these, and ultimately we want to get to some of these skills, and I think we can pick up the pace in a sense, because we're extremely passionate about this topic because we both lived it, and it is very frustrating to feel that sense of wonder that we described at the beginning, and also the sense of frustration when people don't get it. And that's why we lean so heavily on each other as architects, because without ever having to say a word, just that other person who spent that same 5 years in studio gets it. And they know that. That is actually one of the easiest unlocks, is to do that LinkedIn search where at the company that you're thinking of that is definitely not an architecture firm, you are looking for all those people that have some experience, some exposure to the profession that would cut through hours of having to describe what an architect does. And we now have 70,000 people that we know are either in the throes of seeking something else or have already done that. And so those people exist. I mean, there are, 300,000 approximately architects.
There's 121,000 licensed architects in the United States. That doesn't account for the folks that don't call themselves architects or can't call themselves architects. You make up 0.03% of the population. You are usually the most interesting person in the room. You're just always in a room filled with other architects.
This is true. So I'll let you take this.
And this is what always frustrated me. Again, we had the privilege of going to 2 elite institutions. We went to Cornell for our undergrad. We did Harvard grad, arguably the 2 best institutions in the country for architecture school. Our training in business was absolutely awful. My professional practice professor at Harvard, who's now my colleague at Cornell, told us how to lie to the IRS, cheat on your taxes, get away with not paying interns or to pay them to kind of sand your floor. And we were 2 miles away from arguably the best business school in the world. Again, that can be debated, but what really frustrated me there in particular was that I came from a lower middle class upbringing. I was the first in my family to go to college. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, and I had a lot of loans I was gonna have to pay back. And I had no idea how to take my education and make something of it besides just sort of scraping by. I remember a third year came up to us in studio one year when we were freshmen, complaining that when he graduates, he's probably only gonna get, a $50,000 a year job. And I remember being like, wow, I could make $50,000 when I graduate from here. Granted, this was 2009, so again, but I remember thinking like, wow, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And the 2 business classes that I took, that you likely take, some of you are my student in those classes, now did not equip us to talk about our value, our skills, and why we matter in the world. And that's what that class is supposed to do, and it's the only one you take. If you look at sister professions, our lawyers, accountants, accounting, yes, and doctors all take classes in business and practice management to some capacity. They also take classes in ethics. Shocking, we don't. Or we're not supposed to. That's put in the realm of professional practice, and they don't tell me how to teach it. So all of you who hear about my ethical code, it's mine, not one handed down. The one from the AIA says you can't talk about money. That said, Harvard Business Review, which is a kind of periodical that they put out that very fancy, well-paid people read, have owned this idea that, wow, design thinking is going to change the world, but they're not going to architects for it. And they're talking about when you want to hire a design thinker, when you want to hire someone into your C-suite, this article came out right around the time that they started having the role of CDO, so Chief Design Officer, or CISO, Chief Strategy Officer. This was the list they were telling executive search teams and executive teams, this is what you should be looking for in those candidates to lead your organizations. If you want the next Steve Jobs, this is what you're looking for. This is what you learn in school. Granted, I'm not saying you can walk out of your studio review your 5th year or your 3rd year as an MArch and go run a company, although I'm not against you trying. We did it. This is like the 3rd incarnation of this. But these are all the things that you learn simply by going through the design process. And when people ask us, would we do it any differently, I would still get the education that I got. I think the way architects are educated, the studio method, the camaraderie, to some extent, the struggle, is the best education you could get to be a creative thinker. Again, you are taught to fail over and over and over again, and you're taught to celebrate that failure. That may not be how you think about the iterative process, but that's what it is. It's fancy guess and check. You struggle through that, which means you understand how to get through failure. You get through public humiliation. I think it's gotten a lot better, but when we were in school, it was public humiliation. And you can stand there with a smile and get kind of humiliated. Everyone has dealt with that in a client meeting. If you've sat in a client meeting where that person is upset and they're signing your checks. You learn to be resilient through this. And we don't celebrate these skills in school. Again, this is the cost of entry, right? This is that list reordered, or Harvard's list reordered next to what we think the skills you learn in school are. And to me, the main difference, and we underlined it here, is you're not taught to celebrate these skills. They're the cost of entry, as I said, and everyone expects them when you go into an office. So you don't think you're any good at them. We have a chapter in the book called The Insecure Overachiever. It's me. It's not him. He was actually one of the few reasons that I would apply to that job. Or I would think I could even go walk up to our shop manager and say, I want to work here too. Because while I think now, I at least know I had the talent and I had the drive, I didn't think I could do it. And I was in this field that it's like, there's not, at the time, I think our class at Cornell was the first class where there were the same amount of women to men. None of my professors really looked like me, and the women on the faculty didn't embrace that fact, right? So I think the reality here is that we do not cultivate folks who know how to speak about the value that they bring, their skills, their expertise. There's like one in every studio that can, right? And that's the salesperson, and that's the one who's, doing all the shit on the West Side Highway, making millions of dollars in architecture and paying them $25,000 a year as a starting salary because he can. That's unacceptable. The crisis of confidence is the huge thing here, not the skill set. And if we don't learn to celebrate that and translate that, meaning stop hanging out with other architects and talk about what it is that you do, we're going to be stuck here floundering.
So to that end, in case you need a little inspiration, these are just a few of the many people who have done this successfully. These are not like mythical beasts. They are friends of ours. They are former clients. Some of them are way more successful than we are. And
Most of
they
them.
have come, and they have come from this same path, and they all have recorded Tangents podcast episode with us where our amazing host Sylvia kind of coaxes out of them what that experience of transition was like. And there are 50 some odd episodes of this from all different pathways. So I really encourage you, as you think through this, even if you came here hoping to prove us dead wrong and you are completely set on remaining in your role, I want you to be able to go into that next meeting with that same level of confidence as someone who is about to quit and could care less what is said to them. And I think that's important, right? Not because the job market is great. I can tell you from experience, it is sort of rough right now, and I sympathize with each and every one of you. But because it is as important for us to, as a group, level up that sort of inspirational understanding of our value and be able to bring that forward in practice as well as outside of it.
So we're going to, shameless self-promotion, this whole event, but this is an excerpt from our book, and I will read it, even though Jake performed our audiobook and did a much better job than I'm about to do. Architecture is very good at making makers. We were molded into designers and thinkers who could synthesize a variety of skills and emerge with something elegant in every sense of the term, and the reality is that is what you can do with your career. It's not easy to do alone. Jake's tired of hearing me say this, but it's very hard to read the label from inside the bottle. You have a community of folks around you. We have a community here to support you. That includes a bunch of free resources. You can also pay our coaches lots of money to help you. But you do not need to do that. Go back to those 10 skills I all saw you kind of screen grabbing or taking a photo of with your phone. You know how to do this. You can treat your career as a design problem. And if you ever run out of confidence or passion or feeling like you need some help, just go listen to one of these episodes and they'll talk about their struggles. We made it a point to pick people who are not at the end of their career, but people who are early, mid, and senior, so that you can think about and hear their stories not at the end, but rather while they're still in it. Some of these folks, if you go back to season 1, 2, 3, or now, have already made changes, and they're 2 jobs away from what they're talking about here. But if you listen to those and then you kind of talk to them now, because they're all very kind of accessible and they're positive people who want to share their stories, they'll talk to you about this career being an iterative process. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in leaving a role at an office simply because you need to go to another one to get those NCARB hours. There's no shame in saying this one is not for me. Even if they're saying, no, it's a family. It's not. That's toxic. That's not good, right? So your career is a design problem, and you have the skills to solve this. Because when you go into any brief, studio, or a client comes to you, they come to you with a program, they likely come to you with a site or an idea around where you could potentially do a series of things, right? They hopefully come to you with a budget, and they come to you themselves saying, these are my priorities, these are what I want, this is what I don't want. I need you to help me solve this problem. Your career is exactly the same thing. What's your title? Where do you want to do it? What do you need to make? And just in terms of total compensation. And where do you want to do that? And sometimes that last one, there isn't a place and you need to go make that. But again, you are trained to make something out of nothing. You are taught for people to come to you and say, I want to do this and this with all these conflicting ideas. And you have to take that and not only turn it into a potential idea of something, but then you coordinate it, help execute it, and then you get to walk in it. And that is amazing and beautiful, right? There is no reason you can't do that for your own career. if you break out of the bounds of, I have to do what every architect before me supposedly did because those are the ones that I learned about, we should start to celebrate and tell each other more about the architects that are out there, maybe working under that same title, or maybe making their own, that show you a new way to have agency in this world. Because we're all here because we want to do something great. And sometimes doing something great is writing a book, or making a model, or having a family. It's all of these things, right? And as an architect, you're also a human, and all of those things matter. What do you bring to your practice? What does your creative practice look like? What does it give to you, and what do you get out of it? That's what Out of Architecture is.
And with that, I think we'd like to end the lecture part of the talk. Thank you very much for your patience. So we've done, this is, first of all, an outstanding showing. Again, thank you all so much for dedicating this time with us. We have done several of these, and the questions are always across the board interesting, and we welcome whatever that is. There are sort of two subsets of those questions that I would prompt you, and we can pull them up on the screen later again if we need to, fill the time. But really, one side of this is, as an industry, as a profession, how do we fix this, right? How do we fix the attrition? How do we fix people wanting to leave? How do we embrace this sort of desire to be unique within kind of a sea of same architect pathways? Not that any of you are the same, but rather that the expectations are often unified. And on the other side, those questions are about you as an individual, right? Rather than sort of as the institution. And I think we are more than happy to entertain whatever those thoughts are.
And while you mull on that, we would love to have you join us, just being a member of the community. We're actually in the process of launching a more robust online portal for this. The entry to that will be free. There will be resources that are paid because we frankly need to fund it running. But the reality is we have a lot of resources and content out there. This QR code will take you to our website. You can join our job board and our mailing list. Again, all of that is free. You'll find tangents, you'll find red lines. You'll also find resources to access members of our community that will charge you for their time and giving you that advice. But you'll find everything we talked about here and more. We have the book, the audiobook. All of this is available on the website, and we're continually building out this library. So at minimum, I would ask, please join our mailing list so that we can keep in touch. And yeah, we're willing to entertain all of your questions or arguments. You're welcome to argue with us.
With that, we have Katie over here. Thank you so much for supporting. So if you have a question, throw your hand in the air, and we will direct her to you with a microphone. Don't all rush at once. Yes.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Jake and Aaron. Really appreciate the conversation, and actually,
I'm so sorry, I can't hear you.
We cannot hear you, but if you speak loudly, we will repeat the question again.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jake and Aaron. Really appreciate you guys driving this conversation in the profession. I think you guys were around when I left the industry about 3 years ago. The question I have for you guys is a variation of how do we fix this? Of my interest, I really love that interest board you had up and what you could do. I actually really love architecture, so I'm in the development side now, but I kind of keep thinking about how do we actually practice making buildings in a healthier way? And I'm curious, have you seen other practices, architecture practices that you look at and say they're not falling into the same pitfalls that the traditional practices have? And curious if you could share those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at minimum, there are firms that have embraced their business as a design problem. We fall into this trap, and we are a service-based industry, so we fall into the trap of being a service-based business model. But again, I think part of it starts with fostering conversations about how we iterate on that collectively. We're not allowed to do that, thank you to the AIA. But I think it also comes with embracing business knowledge too. I routinely argue with most of the places I teach at in the administration that we need more business courses. We need financial literacy, and we need to be comfortable having those conversations. I think the companies that are doing it are ones that don't necessarily fall into the trap of, I need to publish everything or participate in all these competitions because I don't need that validation. I'm too busy running my company. That said, there are ones that do it really well. Look at Mass Design Group. Matter of fact, they put out all of their financials because they're partly structured as a nonprofit. They break down, even as a part of that though, their services revenue that is not a part of that nonprofit structure. And there are years, if you go back through their business filings, again, because they're nonprofit, it's totally transparent. They'll talk about years where the architectural services float the company, and they'll talk about years where the charitable giving floats the company. And there's this sort of waxing and waning that allows a company to get through those processes. The reality is that I think you need to have folks at the top, or people who are running that business, who are trained in that, and if you're not trained in that, you should partner or find someone who is. Architecture firms have a habit of making architects do everything. So like, especially at like the mid-sized level, it's like the architect is also an architect is also part-time HR. That's an entirely different skill set. It's actually an entirely different industry, right? So I think creating business models where we're able to embrace bringing in and are able to pay people who are talented to do things that we are not, and the really good firms who are doing this, do this. Paul Nakazawa, who taught a really great business class at the GSD, sits on the board of Studio Gang, sits on the board of SO, or used to sit on the board of SOM. Like, there are companies that do this. We just don't celebrate it. We don't talk about it.
I have a little bit of a different lens than the question contained, this sort of word. How do we do that in a healthy manner? And, I'm coming to this with, I have a 2-year-old, I have a family. A lot of my goals were to pay off debt, to allow myself to achieve things that were outside of the bounds of my kind of career focus. And I have seen a lot of architecture firms kind of take up this mantle of how do we create that sense of psychological safety and stability in practice, pay people a reasonable wage, and give them access to do the things that they love. There is a firm in Portland that came to us, about a 15-person firm with 3 partners, and they were struggling because the kind of activist partner, the female partner of the 3, was trying desperately to hire as many women who were pregnant as possible. And she wanted to create a culture in the firm where 30 hours was the norm. It was the expectation. And we sat down and spoke about all these different mechanisms, how if they transition from the hourly model and the kind of the hourly moment, and they just give people that blanket salary and say, your job is your job. It doesn't matter when and how long it takes you to do it. This is what we're going to pay you. Then all of a sudden, the male partners also were interested in this idea of working less, right? Because it wasn't, well, I'm doing 70 hours and she's doing 30 hours. It was, your pay is your pay. And instead of counting and comparing who was suffering the most and thereby taking home the most money, it became this culture of everyone knew that, yes, you are expected to be a person in person for meetings. You are expected to show up and commit to the things that you are actually going to do. But at the same time, if you disappear for 2 hours to go pick up your kid, that's fine. Because you might be online an hour later. You might respond to that message, and it might take a little while. But the biggest thing was they learned to manage that with their clients. And they started to put up barriers where the expectation was not that people were going to be responding to client messages in 15 minutes. It's really not that absurd to respond to an email 2 or 3 days later. We do it all the time. But
I can't not do it now.
I think, there is a perceived urgency that comes with, oftentimes the work that we do, because we feel so grateful for the opportunity to do that work. Oh, how lucky are we that a client is trusting us with this? And that is, again, this element of confidence, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also it's okay to prioritize. It's okay to have multiple and sometimes conflicting priorities. You do that in the design process. You also need to do that in business. People are people. We are a service-based industry. 80% of our output is based on our people. We need to start both individually prioritizing ourselves, and that means studio culture needs to get better. It's still hard. You still have to learn what you have to learn, and sometimes that's by staying up all night. But that shouldn't be how you learn everything. We had a colleague in school who told himself he needed to pull an all-nighter every week in order to keep up. And by the end of the semester, he was mentally and physically broken because your body's not built to do that. And we went to a school where that was like, yeah, you're a badass for doing that. No, you're not. And good, firm leadership, good leaders look at their people and say, you need to go home. You're going to be better when you come back in the morning or even just refreshed in a couple of, whatever it is, and prioritizing that the project is not everything. You know, there's that saying, graveyards are filled with like really important people that were like totally essential to what it is that they were doing. I don't think we've done a great job, and I think school is the reason for this in a bad way, of saying that, you know, there's a graph we don't have on here, but some of you have it on these quarter cards. There's like architecture and everything else in terms of priorities. Like architecture does this when you go to school and everything else does that. That's unhealthy. There's a moment where that obsession should let you take over, or you should take over that. Like that's first year, second year, you're like really falling in love with it. But at some point you need to learn to balance all of these other things. And that is your client satisfaction, sure, but also if more architects start saying no, or more architects start saying, hey, I'm just not going to charge the absolute bare minimum, then maybe we'll have fees that can cultivate that. And frankly, if developers stop teaching classes on how to get cheat architects out of their fees, maybe we'd get better if we learned more of that in school. There are plenty of ways that we arm professions and professionals in understanding whether you kind of like the finance side or not, in at least understanding those mechanisms. You can nerd out over a financial model in the same way that you nerd out over a design model. I know this because I discovered financial modeling later in life, and I was like, wow, this is a really cool tool. I don't think we embrace that enough in school, and I don't think we embrace the human side enough to make it realize, like, okay, how can we make it financially possible? We all just accept that it's not financially possible. And again, also, because we're not allowed to talk about fees.
Great question.
The question back here.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, I'm audible, right? Thank you, Erin and Jake. That was amazing. And thank you for starting out of architecture, because that kind of inspired us in Mumbai, me and my best friend, to start a podcast after architecture. We are on our 22nd podcast right now. And most of our people are, the people we interview are from India and Southeast Asia. And I was really surprised how the problems back there are really similar to how it is right here. And my best friend right now is in London for her grad school, and Reba also, and the architecture scene right there is also kind of similar. So I had this question for you, which comes from all the people we talked to. When we asked them if certain problems were solved in terms of architecture as a profession, would they come back? And most of them said yes, and obviously it comes down all to money in a lot of places. But also, when we try to compare the code of ethics when it comes to work, in case of India, Indian Medical Association has a 6,000-page document, but architecture, like the Architecture Association, it just has 60 pages, which is diabolical, which is just doesn't make sense, right? So if there was some five like changes that you guys must have thought of, which should be made internationally in terms of what moral or ethics should be followed in terms of changing how architecture as a profession works, might bring those people back. Because quite honestly, all the people who left were the most brilliant people out of our school. And I saw this pattern everywhere, because these are the people who stand for themselves. These are the people who are confident, and these are the people who are brilliant in the nature they work. And if architecture keeps losing these people, it's the loss of architecture, right?
So I'm going to reframe a couple of points from the question. First of all, thank you very much for for kind of outlining that. I think there are pieces here that are this is not only happening in the U.S. Obviously, this is common across a number of different markets, countries, geographies, and that one of the common threads that you said in your interviews is that if a lot of these problems were solved, people may not have left, or they might even come back from other places. And then I think the final portion of the question was a little bit about some elements of ethics, and I'm going to let Aaron take that kind of ethical piece. But I just want to address this idea of like returning to architecture, and I can do it from my own lens. I feel that having left architecture, I actually am having a greater impact on the profession than I would if I were still in it. And I wouldn't return, but it's not because of a sort of disdain or anything like that. I feel as though my definition of being an architect has expanded in a way that, even though legally I'm not an architect, I am an architect. I'm a recovering architect, but I'm an architect in a lot of ways that matter. And I find that when, and this is absolutely the least humble thing to say, but when I can stand up in front of a room of executives and wow them with a presentation and humor and graphics that I created and 3D models and so on, and these processes that are a product of so many years of thoughtful education, and I get asked, how do you have this breadth of expertise? I get to credit architecture for that. And I think it is a service to all of you, you're welcome, but also it is really the truth of the matter is that architects are these incredible polyglots, and we are expert generalists in so many ways, and that term I have held so dear because I think it is powerful. I don't know that all of those people left for the same reasons that I did, but I think there is this interesting moment that happens when you realize that buildings are not the end-all, be-all. And they are not the only things that people experience. And that, to me, was a very unique moment where I started to kind of break down these barriers between not only architecture and things like urban design and landscape and interiors, but industrial design and digital design and physical. I mean, our publisher probably isn't going to watch this, but they really did nothing on the design of the book. We did that end to end as architects. And I
Control
think
freaks.
the power of that skill set and the joy that I find in doing all of these other things is sort of like undeniably enticing. And I would not come back to just a singular thing.
In terms of what we can do, I think, to change it, I think events like this are a part of it. I think how we advocate for what it is an architect does in society is how we do it. When you're asked what you do, that is an opportunity to educate someone on what it is an architect does. And again, everyone has a general understanding of what a doctor does, but all doctors practice differently, just in the same way that all architects practice differently, right? I think systemically, a big part of the way that we engage with some of the issues that we've sidestepped in architecture, either by leaving it or by starting my own company. I think at this point I'm probably unemployable when it comes to architecture firms, which is fine. This is our way of trying to engage back into that and starting this dialogue. I think we also, in different ways, do it through teaching. I love teaching professional practice, and I do it in a few different places as a way to try to bring in some of my ideas, but they're only my ideas, number one. And my hope is that, and I say this to my ProPrac students, but that class is not for them now. It's useful now, but it's for them in 5, 10, 15 years when they're actually in these firms able to make that change. This is both a top-down and bottom-up thing that's going to happen, and I'm impatient. So the top-down portion, I've chose to just be like a little anarchist about, and I'm just going to needle the bear. I'm not going to join the AIA, right? I have more of an ability to kind of scream and rant and rave about it through this than by being a part of it. But we're starting to get into having those conversations like this or through interviews and whatnot. I personally would like to see a an architectural oath, like there's a Hippocratic oath. There's an oath that lawyers take. I'm also like kind of a romantic, and there is something beautiful about when you lean into that idea of a profession and you say, this is my role in society, because that means when someone is asking, what is it that you do, you can point them to this document that makes sense. I, as someone who sucked at bio, can read the Hippocratic Oath and understand what drives a doctor. I can read the lawyer's oath. There is one, they're slightly different in every state, but they all fundamentally say the same thing. And it's actually very similar to the Hippocratic Oath. My Cornell students in the room, you were all asked to write a version of what you think the architectural oath would be. I would love an initiative that pushes that. What is it that we care for collectively? We put out statements, we hold conferences, but the world doesn't see that. So how do we turn the profession inside out and talk about why we matter, why we should get paid, and why we should be at more of these tables earlier on in the process? Top down, that's really hard. I don't know the answer to that. This is our answer to that, to some degree. Bottom up, it's by hopefully convincing some of you that anything you heard today is enough to take out and say, I'm gonna own this title, and the next person who asks me about this, I'm not gonna shuffle my feet. I'm like, I make things out of nothing. I turn your ideas that are sometimes disparate and conflicting into spaces that you can inhabit, that you can raise your family in, that people get healed in, that foster dialogue like this. That is what we do. And that's not to kind of, blow smoke at my own ass here, but I do think that architects have the ability. Architecture is not going to change the world, but architects can. And they can do it by embracing the mechanisms they have to make change in society, both physical, digital, and metaphorical. But it starts by actually letting people know what it is we do. And I don't think we do a very good job of that now. And our lobbying group, again, thank you for the invite, I don't think does a great job either, particularly not here in the States.
Excellent question. I think we have time for one, maybe two more.
Thank you for your lecture. As a student, currently also in professional practice, one of the few things that I really realized was missing from at least our curriculum is the resources for financial literacy. And it was kind of up to us to find out how to actually know which tools we need to is relevant for, I guess, our professional practice. But this goes as a person also aspiring to one day have their own firm. What are some ways you can navigate this vast financial landscape? Because I didn't even know there were things like underwriting, pro formas. There's so much more to the architectural financial landscape that I didn't even know existed. So how can you take a designer's mindset and apply this financial thinking? And what are some resources you have to just get lost in it?
You also have an MBA. For me, I got invited to do a free MBA. I was coming out of grad school, and that was a great way for me to get a foray into it. Had I not gotten that, and some of the resources that we share, although that actually is still an MBA that's out there, and we actually foster a scholarship with the business school that we went to, which is Quantic. It's an out-of-architecture scholarship that will go towards tuition. That said, that company puts out a ton of free resources. Their idea was this idea of democratizing an MBA. That said, while you're in school, take classes outside of the College of Architecture, or whichever college it may be. We took a personal finance class in undergrad that I dropped because studio got too busy. That was my first mistake, number one. But number two, there are courses that I would try to prioritize taking while you're in school because you're already paying for them. When you graduate, there are likely courses and certificates that you can get from your undergrad or your grad that will be cheaper than actually going and getting another certificate. If there aren't, edX, it's ed.x, I think .edu, Harvard, MIT, Sloan, which is the NYU school, or Sloan is the real estate school, Stern is the business school. They all put intro courses out there, and the reality is most of the barrier to entry to some of these financial conversations are vocabulary, acronyms, and the vernacular of what we talk about. You are naturally trained to be autodidactic. That's what studio is. Your critics don't teach you, they critique you. You are constantly teaching yourself these things. For the hard skills, like the Excel modeling, there are amazing, super smart nerds who will teach you how to do that on YouTube for free.
Shout out the nerds.
It's my nerd right here. You can learn the hard skills simply through like online tutorials, but I would go, if you can still take classes in your curriculum now, do that. That's the cheap, you're already paying for it, dude. Other than that, Quantic puts out a bunch of great resources. Understand that vocabulary is the main barrier, and you will take it and run with it. edX is another great resource. Some of those are paid, some of those are free.
And I would just say, financial literacy, which for those of you who didn't hear is the core of the question, it does start with just a recognition that you're missing that. I mean, that diagram about, what you don't know that you know, in the words of White Goodman from Dodgeball, I think it's very important. And to ask those questions, really all you need is that kind of curiosity that you bring to projects to begin with. I, out of grad school, before joining a very large corporate company, worked 2 years at a startup in Boston. And I was zero in charge of the finances. But just the tangential exposure, and even my friends who were working at startups and in tech, and they were, all founders and all of this, just sitting down with them and asking about like, what is a cap table? Like, what does raising mean? What does it mean to go get money to build a business? Now we are in this weird position where banks are asking us to take loans as out of architecture. That's a weird thing, is when people start asking you to take their money. Turns out it's expensive, but you can do it. And, I think before you get to that point, it's nice to have those discussions. And it doesn't have to be to the level of even going to take a course. I mean, I will tell you that personally, to go beyond just these sort of micro learning moments is like a very daunting to me. And I don't really have the time, for a number of reasons. But I also think it's fun for an evening, kind of play that part and to, play someone who is hungry for that information. And that can be enough to be in a room. I mean, we both have MBAs. I would be very hard pressed to sit down with the CFO and have a meaningful conversation about a P&L. And I have been responsible for them. So I think it's important to know where your limits are, and then to be able to use your ability to translate complex things into very clear, simple language. We do that as architects and designers. We all have this super explicit, complex, beautiful party in our minds of every building, and there are all of these different reasons and ways that you get there. But you also have a pitch when you sit down in front of a client that does not include the 1,000 steps it took to get there, right? It's a 2 or 3 or 5 step thing that you have distilled. You kind of have to approach these in the same way.
And it starts small. Talk with each other. Like Jake's wife, Rachel, started off as Jake's girlfriend, Rachel, in her second year and our third year. And she used to joke all the time about how all we did was talk about credit. Because we were roommates, and it was just like, all right, who's going to get groceries this week? And what's the kind of available credit? What's your credit score? Can we request an increase? Like, we just we leaned on each other as friends, and I would learn something and explain it to Jake, and Jake would learn something and explain it to me, and those things became more accessible. So when Jake says like CFO, P&L, Chief Financial Officer, profit and loss statement, that's just a document that says here's what you spent, here's what you made. I think there's a language, it's not a language barrier, but it's an abbreviation barrier that makes us think that we don't know what people are talking about. It's actually quite easy, right? You go to make a model in studio, like how much money do you have left over to buy dinner after that? Right? It can be that, and you iterate on that all the time. And I know that there's cultural things around talking about money, and I don't discount that, but you need to talk about money more, particularly as a student, because that's going to inform, for anyone who's kind of taken, again, personal wealth or not, taking salaries where you can't afford to live anywhere near the city on it, it's not helping anybody. Like, the bar's on the floor, guys, right? And it's not your fault, right? We also have a salary document that you have to pay for that basically sanctions you being underpaid. Again, thanks for the invite. But that's not okay either. So don't accept, and don't make it a habit of being comfortable accepting it. If you are going to accept it, understand you're taking a hit for a short amount of time because of some other goal. But recognize you should talk about these things first with each other, build your vocabularies, and then it becomes actually a lot less daunting to talk about the like receipts document with the CFO and have friends who are not architects. Because I have a childhood friend I grew up with who we've kept in touch with, who's the CFO, who I get to talk with these things about, right? And that's not a flex. It's more just like expand your circle. Make sure you can be an advocate for architects and continue to learn. We don't know everything, right? So ask dumb questions. We're really good at dumb questions. Our favorite, or my favorite, I think yours too, professor used to just say like, everything in the really good pieces of architecture are just dumb boxes, but they ask really smart questions. Ask and be curious, as we all are, about what's happening in the world around you. If you're in a firm right now and you're not in these financial conversations, ask if you can join them. Not because you're going to contribute, because you just want to hear what people are talking about. Ask your mentors. Can you tell me what this document looks like? What was the feasibility study process going to look like? Were we a part of the original pro forma document? Like, ask these things. And if you don't know, it's okay to say, I'm really sorry, I just don't know what that means. Can you explain it to me? Because half the time they don't either.
I think we have more questions, but I do think we're coming up on time. And so what we would love to do is Erin and I will sort of mill about. I think we have some extra time, but we want to be very conscious of not only the fact that it is all of your Friday night, but also the generous space that we've been given. Thank you to Katie and the team so much for the invitation.
Thank you all for having us.
Peter, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank all of you very much.
You can find us here.